With Halloween just around the corner, I thought it was the perfect time to jump into a new tutorial and create a fun little Halloween sculpt. Today we're going to be recreating my little vampire sculpture, and I'm going to guide you through each step of my process, covering everything from block out, sculpting, creating the clothing, texturing, before finishing up with some lighting and rendering. Now this is quite the long video, so it might take you multiple sessions to complete, but if you're only interested in certain parts, I've left some chapter notes in the description so you can jump straight to those sections. And if you like these longer form tutorials, don't forget to hit that like button so I can see that you're enjoying them. Now before we jump in, it's worth noting that this tutorial, although catered to beginners, isn't for absolute beginners. So before doing this, I'd recommend at least knowing the basics of navigating around in the viewport, and basic modeling skills would also come in handy too. But nonetheless, I'll try my best to explain everything as we go along. And as you can probably tell, I'm going to be using a graphics tablet for this, but there's nothing wrong with following along using a good old mouse too. Now I know you're probably keen to get started, but I wanted to give a quick shout out to Flexispot, who recently helped me make some adjustments to my workspace that are perfect for these longer sculpting sessions. Because as a self-employed person, the amount of time I spend working and sitting down in front of the screen probably isn't too healthy. So Flexispot sent me their E7 Pro sit-stand desk to hopefully make some changes for the better. And in return, they've just asked that I share my experience with you. It came well packaged with clear instructions that I was able to easily follow to get this put together in about half hour or so. It is pretty heavy, so you might want to ask a friend to help you move this, but I was impatient and persevered. Once I had this set up, I spent some time testing out the sit and stand functionality and mapped my preferred sitting and standing heights to its control panel. Now whenever I need to, I can just hit the stand or sitting button and let the desk do its thing. I think one of my main concerns was whether or not this would be strong enough to support my 3 monitor setup, which includes quite heavy monitor arms, but I was pleasantly surprised to see that this wasn't a problem at all, and the E7 Pro has been incredibly sturdy and I've experienced no wobbling or shaking under general use. Overall, I'm really happy with this investment into my health, and going forward I'm going to make active use of this to help boost my energy levels throughout the day and promote better health overall. Flexispot provides all kinds of standing desks and ergonomic chairs to meet your needs, and you can use my exclusive promo code on the screen now to get a discount off an E7 and E7 Pro. Thanks once again to Flexispot for letting me feature their E7 Pro, and now let's get back to the tutorial. Alright, welcome back. It's been a while since we've done one of these more slow sit down style tutorials, and if I'm honest with you, I'm still trying to get back into the swing of this, so if I do mess up at any point as we go along, which is likely to happen, feel free to leave a comment below if I've caused any confusion or if perhaps something wasn't quite clear. But as usual, what's going to happen here is I'm going to go through my process with you, and I'll try to narrate everything as I go along, and keep an eye down the bottom left here for my mouse clicks and my keyboard inputs and all that type of stuff. But let's go ahead then and jump on into step 1, which is the character block out. So the first step that I like to do for any sculpt that I create is just using some very basic low poly shapes to create the general shape of the model and break it down into each individual part to make it easier to manage and work with as we go forward with the sculpt. But before we do that, let's get rid of some of this background UI to make it look a little bit more minimal. And what I like to do is to jump into my overlays menu here and disable the background grid, the floor, and in this case let's get rid of the X and Y, and sometimes I do get rid of the 3D cursor as well because I find it can be a little bit annoying just sitting there, but in this case, because this is catered more to beginners, I'm going to keep it here and just keep it there for now. So what we're going to do then is jump on into front view to start doing this, and if I hit the tilde key, my views menu will pop up here, and I like to do my main blockouts in front view just so I can get a good front direction on view of my sculpt. But of course, being a 3D model, every now and again we will be rotating and taking a look at the other sides of this character too. But to go ahead and start shaping this up then, we need a little bit more geometry on this object, and to do that we can just go ahead and select it, and inside our modifier menu here, let's go ahead and add a subdivision surface modifier, and I'm just going to search for this, and you can either type it in Or for me, it's right at the top because I use it all the time. And when I'm blocking out these models, I like to use a subdivision surface level of around about 2. So, there's enough geometry there to play with, but at the same time, it still keeps it nice and low poly, so it's not too much. And, we can't, I suppose the idea is to try to force ourselves to not go into too much detail yet. So nice and low poly, and let's go ahead and apply this then. And I think, tell you what, let's also scale this up to make it nice and large. So I'm just going to hit S to scale and just bring this up so it's a little bit bigger for us to work with. And don't forget that whenever you scale an object in Blender, we do need to reset those scale values. Otherwise, when we jump into sculpting later, our tools are going to be a little bit weird. So in order to reset our scale values on an object, let's hit Control A, reset the scale. Everything is nicely reset to 1, and we can hit N to close up the N menu. Okay, so there's the top part of my character head, and I think what I want to do is, if I just draw this in here for an example, I'm going to create a second object for like a jaw, another object for the ears. So we'll probably just create one ear over here and then use a mirror modifier to do the rest for us. And then we're going to have one cylinder, which is going to be the neck. If I zoom out slightly here, we're going to have one more basic object just to come down and be the base of the character bust with the shoulders and the top part of the chest. Well, let me just rub that out. Okay, so there is our plan of action. And to do that then, let's go ahead and just duplicate what we already have to repurpose it. So in order to duplicate the top part of this head, we can just hit Shift D to duplicate. And when we are working on a sculpt down, we want to make sure everything is perfectly centered. So hit Z to make sure you lock this to the Z-axis, because if we were ever to move this to one side or the other, we lose that symmetry, which is going to create issues when it comes to sculpting and trying to keep everything nice and symmetrical. So for now, make sure you're hitting Z whenever you're moving your objects with G there to keep it nice and central. And I think for the jaw of my character, maybe something like that will do. But don't forget, this is a 3D model, so we need to middle mouse click. I'm going to come into my right side view here, and what we want to do is to shrink this down. So to get a good view, let's hit the tilde key for that views menu and go to my right side view. And I think in this case, I'm going to scale it just so it's a little bit more of a jaw shape. So S to scale, but in this case, let's hit Y to fix that to the Y axis and shrink it down a little bit, keeping it all nice and round for now. Then while we're still in right side view, G to move, and then hit R just to rotate this out ever so slightly, just to give this that jaw position. And what I'd like to, make sure I mention as we go along with any tutorial that I do, because these are generally catered to beginners, I don't want you to focus too much on making yours look exactly like mine. The whole goal of these tutorials really is to focus on learning the tools, and then once you are more familiar with the tools, you can go ahead and focus on, your sculpt accuracy, on those side of things. So right now, just focus on the tools and the methods we're using as we're going along. But now with the base of our jaw in place, let's actually jump into sculpt mode and start taking advantage of some of those tools that we can utilize to start shaping this up a little bit. So whether or not this is your first time jumping into sculpt mode, I'll try my best to narrate this for you. But essentially, with our object selected, and let me just double check. Oh, I almost forgot. We do need to reset those scale values again. So a quick Control A, reset the scale, and then hit N to close out that menu. And with our object selected, we can go into the drop down and jump on into sculpt mode. Now, sculpt mode, of course, is going to be a little bit different from what you may or may not be used to. But essentially, what I always recommend when you're first doing this, to get familiar with the tools and the names, if you bring your cursor up to the side of them here till you get this nice double arrowhead, you can click and drag it out, and when you first drag it out, you'll get the stacked version, and then the last one will give you the names, and then you can just middle mouse click to click and drag and look through them. Fortunately, we're only going to be using a couple of tools today, so don't worry about learning all of them, but this is a great way to get familiar with the icons and each corresponding name. But fortunately, the first thing we are going to be using is the most fundamental sculpting tool, which is the grab brush. And the shortcut for that is G. And we do want to make sure then that we also have X-axis mirroring enabled, so to make sure that, you know, everything we do on one side is also going to be mirrored to the other. So hit X here, and let's go ahead then and jump into front view. So tilde key, front view. And the first thing I like to do is to start bringing this in. And if you want to adjust the size of your cursor here, we can just hit F and move it back and forth like this. And then just start making those adjustments, pulling it in ever so slightly. And if you are using a mouse, unlike when you are using a graphics tablet, you do get a little bit of control over your strength. In this case, it's actually not applicable for the grab tool, but if you do find yourself needing to move a lot to make any changes, you can also come up here, increase your strength, perhaps something like 0.75 is pretty nice, something like that, just to make those adjustments on the fly. And I think what I like to do in right side view, let's start pulling out this jawline a little bit more here, keeping it nice and rounded though, and cartoony. But I like to define it a little bit more here, maybe something like that, and rotating our object as we go along to really define the shapes that we want. At this point, it's going to be down to preference, the sort of style that you're looking to create. Perhaps I'll stick the chin out slightly, just to make it a little bit more defined. And the goal here is just to keep orbiting around your object, adjusting your cursor with F, depending on how big you want it. And something like that maybe we'll do initially. And a quick way we can toggle onto the other object while staying in sculpt mode is by hitting Alt Q. So that'll let us jump back and forth between different objects without needing to go back into object mode, select another object, and so forth. And then the same thing again, let's go ahead and make sure we have X-axis enabled on this new object. I'm just going to do the same thing again. I'm just going to make my cursor nice and big with F, and then perhaps just raising this up slightly, pulling the sides of the head in a little bit, just so they're not too bulbous. But then again, this is quite the stylized character, so, you know, it's completely up to you how you want this character to look. So now I'm in right side view here. Let me shape up this head to make it nice and round. But I tell you what, I'm quite looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with, because it's one of those things where I can show you the basic tools, but, you know, it's up to you to have fun and experiment and just try to come up with new and exciting things as you learn 3D art and just Blender as a whole. But okay, how is that looking? I think the general shape is quite nice. Let's go ahead then, and I think let's block out the ears and the neck too. So for this, we can jump back into object mode. And as a quick tip, the shortcut to get access to these, just like the view menu, is Control Tab. And we can just go ahead and jump into object mode. And once again, let's start with, I think we'll start with a cylinder for the neck here. So Shift A, cylinder, and then let's put G to move, Z to keep it nice and centered, and let's thin this down with S, like this, and then S to scale again, but while we are scaling, hit Z to lock this to the Z axis. And now in right side view, so tilde key, right side view, let's put this in the right position, so G to move, R to rotate a little bit, and maybe I want mine somewhere or something like that. Maybe a little bit thinner. And as a quick tip here, you can actually scale on a single axis by hitting S to scale. And if I hit Shift Z, that's going to scale it on every axis except for the Z axis. So it's like we can make it thicker and thinner, nice and easily. But I think something like that will do just fine. Back into front view. Okay, this is looking pretty good. Perhaps now we'll add some ears, and, you know, it's up to you if you want to. You could duplicate the head for this or add a new object again. So I tell you what, let's try duplicating the head. So let's do Shift D to duplicate. And I think what I'm going to do is just S to scale. And then S and Z to scale this on the Z axis. And I want my vampire to have some nice elongated pointy ears. And of course I am moving it off the X axis, the Z axis at this point, because we need to place it over here and mirror it across. But with that there, let's just rotate it with R. And then in our right side view, so tilde key right side view, let's rotate again. Place this generally in the right place. Once again, does not need to be perfect, but maybe something like that. And then with our ear selected, let's go into our modifiers, search for mirror, select, and in this case we want to mirror this ear across the head. So for our mirror object, let's select the top of the head ear here, and then we can make some additional adjustments to the ears as we go along. Just the general placement for now should be fine. Maybe something like that. I could probably play with this all day, so I best just leave it there, otherwise we will just be blocking out for hours. But then we got one more piece to do for the blocker then, and that's just this chest region. So I suppose once again we could duplicate part of the head, so Shift D to duplicate, G to move this, and Z to lock this to the Z axis. And then in this case, let's do S to scale, Z to lock this to the Z axis. And then let's take a look in our right side view, just move this into place generally. And then quick scale reset with Control A. And then Control Tab to jump into sculpt mode. And using the same grab brush with X axis mirroring enabled, let's just go ahead and make our cursor nice and big to move this and adjust it to our liking, just so we've got a little bit more of a shoulder shape. And don't forget to look at it from all angles, so right side view to pull in the back here, because it's sticking out very far there. And don't worry about being too neat with this though, just focus on learning those tools and just get the job done, you know, while you are learning and practicing. I think what I want to do then also is let's just flatten this piece out nicely. And to do that, I like to use the line project. Where are you? There it is. So select the line project. And what this will do is if I click and drag this here from left to right, you can see we've got this, I was pointing on my screen there as if you could see. We've got this dash line, and then we've got this sort of shaded region. And what's going to happen is anything within that shaded region is going to be flattened up to that hashed line. So if I just let go like this is now nicely flattened. And you can just do this, you know, like that, just to get that nice flat edge on the bottom of the character bust. But now let's take a quick step back and see how we are feeling about this. I think initially, my neck is a little bit too long. So do we want to, I'll tell you what, let me press G for the grab tool, F to make this nice and large, and let's just bring this up rather than adjusting my neck size directly right now. Maybe something like that. Okay, and once again, as much as I will preach to not worry so much about perfectionism, that doesn't take away from the fact that I will probably play and tinker with this more than I should. So, you know, sometimes you've got to take your own advice and stop playing with these things. And let me jump into object mode and let's take a quick look at the scale. Do I want something bigger or smaller? I think maybe something like that will do for now. Having a quick look from all these different angles. And if it does get confusing with me jumping between different views, don't forget that'll come in time, because I'm so used to just hitting the tilde key, jumping to these different views so quickly. Just have a good look at my character. You know, you'll get there, and you know, that'll just come a little bit more naturally. But something I did notice there was the back of my character's head from the top is not a very good shape. Generally the head should slope inwards towards the front, not the back. So let's go ahead and jump into sculpt mode with Control Tab on my character head here, and in top view let's hit G for that grab brush and F for the scale of my cursor, and just slope it a little bit towards the front, fatten it up a little bit towards the back, still trying to keep that sort of stylized appearance. Let me look at my right side view. Okay, that's looking pretty cool. And I think the last thing we really need to block out here is the eyes. So let's go back into object mode. And just to get my initial placement for the eyes while I'm still playing around in the early stages, I'd just like to add a UV sphere. So let's hold shift and right click to move our 3D cursor, and let's move it to where we want the object to be, right here. Shift A, mesh, and add a UV sphere. Right click to shade the smooth temporarily, and let's just scale this down with S. However big you want your eyes to be is completely up to you, but in right side view, let's pull these inside the head. Okay, maybe something like that. I'll probably play with these a little bit more as we go along with the rest of the sculpt. It's one of those situations where you're never really going to be set until you see the whole thing, cohesive coming together. And let's go ahead and add a mirror modifier to this eye then, and mirror it across the head. Reset the position of this cursor with Shift S, cursor to world origin, so it's nice and centered again. And I think, what's missing? Something right in the middle of his face called a nose. I think one more thing then is just to duplicate the head again. So Shift D to duplicate, Z to lock this to the Z axis, S to scale, and then in our right side view, let's bring this out just to be the basis of our character nose. In my case, I'm just going to shape it nice and big and round. Maybe something like that. And not forgetting to hit Control A and apply a quick scale. And now I think the last thing I want to do here is perhaps to shape up the ears a little bit more to finalize this block out. And let me just double check if I need to apply a scale. Once again, I do. So Control A, apply scale. N to close up that menu, and then Control Tab for quick access to our sculpt mode. And in this case, I'm going to turn off axis mirroring because these aren't, this ear isn't going to be a perfectly mirrored object. It'll be mirrored across to the other side though. And in this case, I think what I'm going to do is just pull it in here. Let me take a look at it from the front. Perhaps I'll pull it in, smooth it over a little bit on the back. And if you hold shift, this is going to give us quick access to that smooth tool, which is just going to nicely smooth things over for us. Something like that. And then making my cursor nice and small. Let's pinch this up a little bit, keeping an eye on it from a variety of different angles. And then perhaps we'll just push it in a little bit here. And it's one of those things where take your time with this. It's really, sculpting isn't a rushed process. The more time you spend on your sculpts, the better they will turn out. But I think, let me take a step back and have another look at this. Okay, I think that's looking pretty nice for my block out. And something I like to do every now and again is to jump into my viewport shading here, perhaps turn on random, just to get a nice look at each individual object. Okay, looking cool. Let's switch this back to material. Nice. And I think that is our block out looking pretty good. At this point, we can go ahead and jump into the next step where we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the sculpting tools to start smoothing things over and adding in some nice details. I'll see you there. So up until now, we've taken a bit of a surface level look at the sculpting tools, but now what I want to jump into is how we can combine our objects together and take advantage of Blender's remeshing tools to generate more topology for us to sculpt on, as well as to combine our objects together to get a nice smooth transition between our objects. Now in this case, I'm only going to be combining the nose and the jaw and the head here, and I'm going to be keeping the neck and the ears as separate objects because we're not really going to see any of the seams anyway. So it's worth just, only combining things that are really necessary and just focusing on the details where they are more needed. So in this case then, how can we go ahead and do this? Well, initially, back in object mode, what we need to do is to combine our objects into one. And we can do this by clicking on one piece. So in this case, I'm going to select the jaw and shift selecting on the top of the head. And then we can either go into object and click join, or you can see the shortcut is Control J. So I'm going to hit Control J, just like that. So now this is one object, but of course we still see those seams. So let's take a look at how we can remesh these objects together to get a nice smooth transition. In order to do that, we need to jump back into sculpt mode. So let's hit Control Tab to go back into sculpt mode here. And up here we can see we have the remesh option. Now I'm going to be showing you the shortcut variants because the shortcuts give you a bit more of a visual indication of what you're doing anyway, which is much better than just working up here. So in this case, what we're going to do is if I just press R while hovering over my object here, you can see we get this nice grid pop-up. And what this is doing is indicating to me what amount of topology this is going to generate. So we can essentially set the level of remesh before we go ahead and remesh. Now, what I'd recommend is taking your time with this, and we want to start nice and high, nice and low poly, so perhaps something like 0.3 or 0.25. So if I just put mine to around 0.25 and click, and like that, you'll see we have now set the level up here. And if you want, you can actually type this up here to make it exact. And then once you've set the level that you want, you can hit Control and R to go ahead and implement that remesh. And you can see the Blender now has gone ahead and generated that topology for us, keeping it nice and low poly initially, because the higher you go, the more stress is going to put on your computer. And if you don't really have a high-end machine, sculpting can actually be quite taxing on your computer, and you may even end up with a crash. So it's one of those scenarios where you might want to save at different stages throughout this tutorial, just in case, because you never know what could happen. But one thing I like to do before I go ahead and start sculpting then is to go ahead and symmetrize the topology here, because remeshing can sometimes create inconsistencies between the left and the right. So inside our x-axis drop down up here, or our axis drop down, come down and hit symmetrize, and you could see there was a slight change there. This Blender has now fixed for me, and I can safely go ahead and start sculpting with this new topology at this higher resolution. And I think the first thing I'm going to do is just hold shift to start smoothing over these transitions a little bit, perhaps smoothing over the chin. And if you are finding your smooth brush is a little strong, or you're using a mouse, you might want to come and select it manually and just play with the strength. In my case, I think 0.5 was okay. And then I'm just going to hit G to go back to my grab brush, hit F to adjust my scale of my cursor, and just play around with the position and shape of my character a little bit more to my liking. Now that I've got this extra bit of resolution, remembering to jump to different angles and different sides. And I think what I'm also going to do then is start to define the eye cavity a little bit. So we can also do this with the grab brush again. So I'm just going to rotate around my character a little bit, perhaps pull out the front here for the nose slightly, smoothing over that little bit there. Perhaps pull it in the eye cavity slightly, and just adjusting these to my liking. I think I'm probably going to add a separate object for the eyelids. That just tends to be my preference for how I like to create my characters. But something like that looks pretty good. And I also like to use the inflate brush, which if I start just lightly drawing over this is going to inflate those areas. So if I do it exaggerated, you can see what that's doing, sort of inflating it a little bit like a balloon, just very lightly. Something like that. Or perhaps I'll just bring his cheeks in a little bit more. And once again, one of those scenarios where I will probably end up playing with this for a lot longer than I should and making this video much longer than it really needs to be. But nonetheless, I hope you're still going to find it quite useful for learning a little bit of sculpting in Blender with me today. Okay, perhaps we'll up the resolution a little bit more so I can just deepen the eye cavity a little bit. So R, once again, to set our resolution. Perhaps we'll go for something like 0.14 and then Control R. Once again, let me just open up my mirroring, symmetrize just in case, but it seems that's okay. And let's go ahead and zoom in slightly, start pulling in the corners of the eye, because I want this character to have nice deep bony eye sockets, you know, kind of undead-like, you know, a little bit like a skeleton, I suppose. But as I say, don't spend too much time when you're just learning the tools. You really want to be just focusing on learning the tools, getting as many sculpts done as you can, just so you can get familiar with everything. And I think something, let me jump into side view here. And I'm just still using my grab brush, so a lot of this doesn't need too much narration. I'm just playing around, smoothing, so hitting that shift key every now and again to smooth things over till I find something I like. Okay, cool. So I think the next step is to probably remesh the nose in a little bit too. Perhaps play around with that position. So let's go back into object mode briefly, into my right side view. Let me pull this out a little bit more to give me a nice button nose. All right, that's looking good. Quick Control A to reset the scale on that, and then Shift selecting onto the head, and then hitting Control J to join these up nicely, and then going into Control Tab to jump back into sculpt mode. And once again, setting our resolution. Perhaps I'll drop it a little bit more towards 0.1. Okay, looking cool. Do I need to symmetrize? Yeah, just a smidge. And perhaps at this point it's worth using another tool to start carving in some nostrils. I like the Draw Sharp tool, which is just going to let me draw these sharp lines on my character. And you can adjust the fall off on your brushes and stuff. There's a lot of, you can customize up here, but, right now there's no need for us to dive too deep into these. But I do like to change my fall off to sharper, so it's nice and pointy. Perhaps I'll increase my strength to something like 0.65, and then adjusting the size of my cursor. Let's just start drawing in these nostrils a little bit, and then using the grab brush, so G for the grab tool, and just start shaping up this nose to my liking. And don't forget, this is a 3D model. Keep hitting that middle mouse button, rotate around your model to keep an eye on the shape from all angles, because that's a bit of a habit you're going to need to get into. I'm going to pull the nose in slightly here. Okay, how is this looking? Not too bad. I think at this point we could probably start carving in the mouth a little bit more too, but perhaps we might want a little bit more resolution again, so perhaps 0.05. Okay, we're getting nice and high now with the resolution. And in fact, if you want, you can see under statistics here, so in the overlays menu, you can enable statistics to see the exact face count. Now, right now, we've only got 29,000 faces, which is pretty low compared to what, you might see other people use. For example, in ZBrush, which is, like the main sculpting tool out there, you'll see people working on sculpts with millions of faces. So when I'm in Blender, though, I try to keep it relatively low because Blender's performance is not as good as something like ZBrush. But to go ahead and create the lips here, I do have a bit of a method that I try to utilize in most of my characters. But of course, keeping in mind, I don't think any method is particularly universal to everything. But what I'm going to do is, with the Draw Sharp tool selected, let's just get a nice smallish size cursor here, and I'm rocking 0.65 on my strength right now, making sure this is set to minus to start carving into the mesh. And I'm just going to give him a nice wide smile, almost a little menacing, because he is a naughty little vampire who perhaps is up to no good. Right, let's grab the grab brush with G just to pull this out a little bit, and then pull in the cheeks a smidge as well. And now to refine this a little more, I like to use the crease brush. That's way too strong. Let's drop that to like 0.15, making sure it's on minus. And then just refine our seam a little bit more here. And then going back to the Draw Sharp tool, let's define a lower lip. So I'm going to increase the size and then just gently draw in a little area underneath to start defining the area between the lip and the chin here. Smoothing it over with shift where I need to. And then grabbing the grab brush with G to start refining our shape a little bit, because these areas are sticking out a little bit far for my liking. Pulling these in nicely. And as I said, you know, it's one of those things you're going to need to just keep refining, smoothing over and adjusting as you go along. Perhaps we'll inflate now. And the inflate brush is going to nicely close up that seam a little bit more for us. And we can also inflate that lower lip a little bit more if we want to. Smooth over the transition on each side of the lip. Smooth over these little bumps around the face here. And let's stick the chin out a little bit more. Okay, I think we might need a little bit more of a cheekbone. So where is my inflate brush again? And just inflate these a little bit, just to give them some nice cheeks. And I'm holding shift just to smooth over as well as I go along here. And then G for the grab brush again to start pulling these in a little bit more. And then let's pull these in slightly here. And give him a little bit more of a round face. How are we looking? Do we want to define the upper lip a little more? We could with the draw sharp brush perhaps. So right now it's set to minus, so it goes in. But if I hold control, that's going to invert what it's doing. And we could use this to define a little bit of an upper lip if we wanted to. Perhaps even put a little septum in. No? Okay, let's not do that. Let's just smooth this over and keep the upper lip nice and flat and stylized. Because not all decisions are the correct ones. Okay, how is this looking? Okay, that's not too bad. That is a big, wide smile and exactly what I am looking for. Okay, let me pull this back and have a little look. Okay, cool. Nice little pair of lips. Of course, we'll neaten this up as we increase the resolution as we go along. But I think for now, that should do. Next up, what should we do next? We still need to add an upper eyelid and a little bit of definition to the lower eyelid, so perhaps we'll do that before we move on to detailing the ears. So to go ahead and add an upper eyelid, I'm just going to go ahead and repurpose part of the eye here. So I'm going to tab into edit mode on the eye, and let's turn on X-ray so I can see inside, and making sure we have vertices selected here, I'm going to box select just half of the eye like this, and then Shift D to duplicate. Right click to leave exactly where it is, and with it still selected, we just want to press P and then separate this based on the current selection. Perfect. Now back into object mode, turn off X-ray, then we can just click and click again until we get the eyelid here or the half sphere, and just scale it up slightly so we can see it. So S to scale, and now let's fill this hole in it. So to make this a bit easier to see, just / to isolate. Now tab into edit mode. Let's go ahead and close up this circle. So I'm going to go into edge select mode, hold Alt and select this whole loop. And we can just hit F to fill. And then it's probably worth adding a couple of faces in here as well. So I to inset, I to inset, and I to inset. And now / to bring everything back into object mode. And now we can adjust the rotation on our eyelids with R, and then double tap R as well to sort of be able to freely move these around. And I think I'm going for a slightly tilted look like this. Something like that. Looks pretty good. Almost like, not angry, but he doesn't really care. You know, he is very lax. He has no concerns. He is a cool vampire who is going to live for a very long time. So that'll do for the eyelids temporarily. I think now it's probably worth moving on to the ears. So let's start adding some definition here. But before we do, let me just have a quick sip of my tea. And the voice is back. All right. Oh, so if you're still here, sticking this out, well done. I hope you're enjoying following along with me on this nice slower paced Blender tutorial today. But now let's go ahead and carry on detailing our mesh here, and we're gonna add some detail to the ear. So I want to keep this nice and simple, just create a little bit of a cavity and then just mold the shape a little bit more. So the exact same method as we've been using so far. We're just going to jump into sculpt mode, so Control Tab and then R to set our remesh level, maybe something like 0.6. And then just Control R to go ahead and remesh. And something you might want to do here, because right now we've got an active mirror modifier on this ear to mirror over to the side, this can actually impact your performance while sculpting. So if you want, feel free to go ahead and disable, which one is it? This one right here. And this one will disable the modifier while you are in the viewport. And then we can just re-enable it once we're ready. But that'll do for there for now. So let's just hold Shift and smooth this over initially. Something like that. And on the back, let's take a look around the reverse side. Okay. And then using the grab brush, let's just refine this shape slightly. And let's use the draw brush, which is pretty much the same as the draw sharp, except it's a little smoother. I'm going to set this to minus. So, and just start carving into my ear a little bit, just to create a little bit of a cavity. And don't forget to play around with your strength if you need to. Something like that. And then teeter off a little bit towards the top. Maybe my draw sharp tool would come in handy at these points where it gets a little bit thinner. And then using my grab tool with G to adjust the shape and perhaps define where the ear comes in slightly. I'm not too sure what this part of the ear is called. I really need to brush up on my anatomy, but not quite the lobe, but the little sticky in part here. Just define that ever so slightly. Ooh, this is looking cool though. I like the shape. Not looking bad at all. Maybe we'll adjust it a little bit more. How are we feeling about this? Okay, let's re-enable this briefly and take a step back. Okay, that's not looking too bad at all. Let's take a look at the reverse side. Perhaps we'll just adjust the shape on this. I for the inflate tool and just inflate the backs of the ears slightly. And then just smooth things over a little bit more. And, you know, once again, it's one of those things where you can spend as much time on these as you like. And the longer you do, the better your results will be. But maybe something like that will do for now. And of course, you know, these are still looking a little bit sharp in areas. So of course we are going to probably want to increase our resolution once again on our remesh, just so we can go ahead and get a nice smooth finish on this character. Let's see, what else do we need to do? I think I also need to add the bags under the eyes and smooth over these eyelids a little bit. Should we do that now? Yeah, let's do that now. So I'm going to jump back into the head, back into sculpt mode, and let's use the draw tool. Make sure it's set to plus, just to add a little bit of a bag underneath this character's eyes. And then switch into the grab tool with G. Let's just define the shape a little bit more. And then perhaps smooth it over around the edges, just so the bags are only sort of in the center. And I just want this to give him a bit more of an undead sort of appearance in my right side view. Let's grab these. And perhaps we'll increase the brow region here as well. Smoothing things over with the smooth brush, just holding shift, just to get a nice smooth finish on the head here. Okay, looking pretty nice. And let's also, what happens if we add a subdivision modifier to the eyelids? Okay, that looks pretty cool. I like it, just to give us a little bit more of a nice smooth finish on these. And at this point, I think the main details of the sculpt, if I'm honest with you, are looking really nice. The only thing we need to do at this point is to start upping the resolution even more to really start smoothing these over. So perhaps Let me just increase the size of these eyes as well, actually. So perhaps then we'll start upping the resolution. I'm just going to take my time with this, so feel free to mute me, put some music on. It's completely up to you, but I'll leave this footage in anyway of me just upping the resolution even more, just so I've got even more topology I can play with. I'm now at 101,000 faces. I could not get that out. And now I'm just holding shift to smooth over these areas, and you can see we're really starting to get a nice smooth finish on this sculpt now. Just be careful when you're smoothing. If your brush is set, your smooth brush is set too high, you can lose a lot of detail, and of course you will lose some detail inevitably when you remesh your mouth. So we will just smooth this over and then come back in and just redefine it. But with the extra detail, we can, you know, just refine the areas now that we want to exaggerate a little bit more. Perhaps I want to bring these out slightly, perhaps bring them in on the side of the head a little bit. And to redefine our lips, let's grab the crease brush again, set to minus, and just redefine this section here, nice and easy. I may or may not end up remeshing again, so sometimes I might do something and need to redo it multiple times, but you know, such is the process when it comes to sculpting a character. Okay, how is that? Not too shabby. My head is looking a little lumpy, so perhaps I need to take some time to smooth over this top surface, but the head is going to be covered by some hair anyway, so I'm not too concerned about this. And there's a bit of a lump in the center here. Let me just smooth that over. Okay, that's looking better. Okay, how is he looking? How are we feeling about our vampires? Let's bring this in here. Smooth that over a little. I think he's looking quite cute, you know. A little bit cheeky. Crease brush just here, just to define my bag a little bit more. Okay, very nice, very nice. And let's do the same for the ear. So I'm just going to up my resolution a little bit more, just to give me enough resolution to get a nice smooth finish. And adjusting the shape to my liking. Maybe something like that will do. So at this point in time, it's probably wise to hit Control S to make sure you do save your file, because you wouldn't want to lose all the detail that you've created so far. And as I say, you know, feel free to spend more time than I am on this sculpt, because of course, you know, I don't want this video to take too long, and I don't want to bore you with all of the little details, because even now I'm struggling to pull myself away from teetering and tinkering with all of these little areas that I feel are not quite right. But Keelan, you have to step away. That's it. Okay, we're stepping away from the head. Now we just need to briefly refine the body down here. And I think we'll just shade smooth the neck. So right click shade smooth. We're not really going to be sculpting on that. But on the body, let's go ahead and tab into edit mode. And remember what this means. We need to apply a scale. So back in object mode, Control A, apply a scale, and then jump back into sculpt mode like this. And let's go ahead and remesh this to give us more topology like this. And then making sure we have x-axis mirroring on, and perhaps just do a quick symmetrize as well, just to make sure this is all nice and symmetrical. And now let's just go ahead and start smoothing this over. We've got 26,000 faces right now, which may be, it could be too much really for what we've got going on here. Let's not worry too much about it. You know, 26,000 really isn't that many. And then just using the grab brush to refine the detail and shape a little bit more to my liking. Holding shift to refine. And then lastly, let's add this flat edge to the bottom using the line project. And I'm just going to click and drag this up like that. I think that'll be a nice bust, chest area for our sculpt. At this point, I think we are generally done with the base of the character model, but let me take a quick look from the right side. Yeah, let me just move this. So G to move, and then G to move the shoulders, just to get these looking a little bit more natural in their positions. How do we feel? I think that's looking pretty nice. Now let's go ahead and parent the ears to the head. So I'm going to shift select on the head with the ears selected, Control P, parent, keep transform. It's probably worth doing the same with the eyes and the eyelids too. So I'm shift selecting both of these, selecting the head last, then Control P, set parent to object and keep transform. Now if I decide to rotate the head, or to change the position to my liking, the ears and the eyes will follow along nicely. But at this point, we are now in a good position to move on, to go ahead and create the hair. And I think for the final part of the sculpt, we'll go ahead and create the clothing. So first things first, let's go ahead and sculpt the hair. And now this one is going to be nice and easy because we're going to add a nice big blob that will just sculpt to our liking. And now this is one of those areas where I often recommend having a play around. You don't need to do exactly as I do. You can create any style of character that you want. But to achieve this today, what I'm going to do is just do Shift A, so we can go ahead and add in a new cube. And just scale this up, and then we're going to hit it with a subdivision surface modifier, and let's give it a subdivision level of 3, so we can hit Control 3 for the shortcut for that. And now in right side view, let's just line this up. So G to move, S to scale, just so it sits on the head nicely like this. Now let's apply our subdivision modifier, and not forgetting to apply a quick scale reset with Control A. Now we can go ahead and start sculpting this to our liking. So Control Tab, jump into sculpt mode, and just like we've been doing already, we're going to grab the grab brush with G, F to adjust the scale of our cursor, turning on X-axis mirroring, and now just adjusting the head, not the head, sorry, the hair, so that it sits all on top of the head where we like. Something like that. I think my character has quite large vampiric hair, looking very old-fashioned and almost like they've got some slicked back hair. So, but I'm always curious and excited to see what designs you tend to come up with, because you don't always need to do exactly as I do, and I often recommend playing around and challenging yourself to try something a little bit different. Okay, I think that's good for the initial base. Now let's get the draw sharp tool, and I'm going to start creating some little ridges in this. And if you want, you can start remeshing now too to get a little bit more definition. So let's just remesh, keeping this still quite low poly, maybe 0.09. Whoa, that's a lot of faces, maybe a little less right now. 0.15, 4000, that's not too bad. Let's also symmetrize, just to get everything looking nice and neat. And let's just go ahead, using the tools we've been using already. I'm going to use my draw sharp to start drawing these ridges all across the hair to make it look like we've got that nice slicked back look. And then also pulling it down a little here just to get those sideburns going. We're going inside the hue a little, so let me just pull that in. Then using the draw sharp set to plus, let's start drawing this out. Grab tool, just start adjusting to our liking. And if you find yourself getting areas where you're getting some really stretched out mesh like this, just hit Control R again to remesh, to give yourself more mesh to work with. Whoops. And just take your time. Take your time. Find a hairstyle you like. And just see what you can come up with. I think I need to pull these back slightly. And I think his forehead is looking a little bit thin. Let me just grab this and widen it up. I want his head to look quite large for like a nice stylization. Okay, it's looking cool. Alt Q to toggle back and forth between your objects nice and easily. And then Shift C for the crease brush to start refining these a little bit more. With the grab tool, I'm just going to keep adjusting. So at this point, I think you're probably going to be at least familiar enough with the tools that you can probably ignore my rambling for a while. So feel free to turn on your own music. Ignore me talking nonsense as I just sculpt this character and just, have a beautiful time, enjoy yourself. Toggling back and forth. Let me set this to minus on my draw sharp tool. Okay, not looking too bad. Whoops, keep hitting the wrong keys. So if we ever see my guy disappear or something disappear, that's because I'm supposed to be hitting the G key, but I keep hitting the H key. That's what happens when you get a new keyboard. You keep hitting the wrong keys. Okay, how is this looking? I don't think it's looking too bad in terms of style. I think we could probably start upping the resolution now. So R to adjust our remesh resolution, Control R, 20,000 faces, okay, 22 rather, and then hold Shift to smooth these over, something like that, and then just adjust to your liking. Looking pretty nice. And then, of course, once you've smoothed, feel free to grab like the crease brush or something and come in and start refining your edges a bit more again, so they stand out a little nicely. And perhaps we'll just, maybe we'll inflate the sides a little bit. Okay, whoops, wrong key again. Inflate the sides here. Okay, how does that look? So let me just turn off my overlays briefly. Okay, cool. I think that looks pretty nice for the hair. I think I need to add a little bit of a sideburn, and I think what's left to do? Oh, the eyebrows. We need to add a little bit of a brow too, and I think that should be the base of the character complete. So for the sideburn, we're just going to do the exact same thing again. I'm just going to hold, or let me turn on my overlays first. I'm just going to hold Shift and right click to move my 3D cursor. And once again, we can just add in a cube, give it a subdivision level of 2 or 3. So I'm going to go with 2 for now. Stretch this out a little bit and just put this into place, ready for us to start sculpting on. And then quickly apply our subdivisions, Control A to adjust that scale value, and then jumping back into sculpt mode, let's go ahead and grab the grab tool with G, and then just create our nice little sideburn by moving things into place, something like this. And I think in my case, what I did was remesh at a little bit of a higher resolution. Doesn't need to be too high, this one, because it's only a little sideburn. And then using the draw sharp tool, I think I just added a couple of ridges like this, nothing major, and then holding Control to invert to bring some back out. And then using the grab brush just to adjust the position to my liking. And of course, once again, we're going to mirror this across in just a moment. Let's try it. So back into object mode, grabbing the sideburn, search in here for a nice mirror modifier, and our mirror object once again is going to be the head. And then let's do Shift S, cursor to world origin to reset that. And then I think the one more piece of hair we need to add is the brows, and you guessed it, we're going to add a cube and then sculpt it into our desired shape. So you're probably noticing a trend when it comes to sculpting in Blender. So Shift right click just to move this 3D cursor into place, Shift A, add a cube. I'm going to scale this down and scale it out on the X axis. So S to scale, X to lock it to the X axis. And let's do a subdivision level of 2. So Control 2. And in top view, let's just rotate this with R and scale it up a little bit more. Something like that. In terms of position, I think we'll do. Now let's apply our subdivisions. Control A to quickly apply that scale reset. And once again, back into sculpt mode. Pressing G for the grab tool. And we're going to move and grab and move our brow into place. Rotating the camera as we need to achieve our desired look. And I'm sure you're probably going to get fed up with me at this point, telling you to do the same thing over and over again. But such is the nature of sculpting. So let me just hold Shift to smooth over these sections. And it's worth noting at this point as well that, there's lots of different methods to achieve the same look. I don't always use the method that you're seeing right now. Sometimes I'll take advantage of things such as the multi-resolution modifier for different aspects too. But, there's no one definitive way to do anything in Blender. So, in the end, just find what works for you. Now let's increase our resolution with R, Control R, to go ahead and remesh. Something like that. Perhaps we'll go a little bit higher on the resolution, just to get a nice smooth finish, and then holding Shift to swipe this down. Smooth this all over nicely. And if we want, we can also inflate with I, just to get this looking a little bit more like it's sticking out of the character head. And I think what I did in my original concept was also use the Draw Sharp tool, set to quite a thin cursor, and set to minus, and just draw a couple of lines, sort of in and out on this. So some going in and then hold a Control to invert to bring them back out to get a bit of a nice look going on. Oh, wrong key again. So G for the grab tool, and then just move these to my liking. Cool. And then you guessed it, one last mirror modifier to go ahead and mirror this across. Shift S to reset the cursor to the world origin. And would you look at that? The base of our model is looking pretty good. And there's probably other little details we could add, but I think for the sake of this tutorial, this will do nicely and demonstrates how you can actually achieve a lot with just a small list of tools. So in this next step now, we're going to be modeling and sculpting some clothing, but if you haven't already, go ahead and pause me to take a break, come back in 5 minutes after you've stretched your legs a little bit, and then let's go ahead and get into the next section. Alright, welcome back. It's actually day 2 for me. I decided to step away for the night and come back fresh and ready to take on the rest of this sculpt. So, where were we? So it looks like we pretty much were done with the base sculpt. Although looking at it now, I realize we probably should add in some pupils. And I also forgot to add in those little teeth. So before we go ahead and jump into modeling and sculpting some clothing, let's just add those in quickly. And as a quick creative challenge, if you want to try doing that yourself without me guiding you through it, feel free to pause me and try that yourself. But I'm going to go ahead and do it now. So let's firstly enable my screencast keys. So you've got those for reference. And let's start with the pupils. So I'm thinking for the pupils, I'm just going to keep them nice and cartoony today. So let's just duplicate the base of the eye and shrink it down as a pupil. So Shift D to duplicate this, right click to leave it perfectly centered on where it actually is right now, and then S to scale, and then G to move and Y to bring this out. And initially he's going to look really wide-eyed, but we need to flatten these out. So S to scale again and Y to lock that scale into the Y-axis. Perfecto. All right, so don't forget to use that tilde key for jump in between those views very quickly. So tilde key front view. And now let's go ahead and adjust the scale a little bit more, maybe something like that. And now what I like to do is to parent the pupil to the eyeball. So with the pupil selected, Shift select on the eyeball, Control P and Object Keep Transform. Now what we can do is select the eyeball, and if we press R twice, I can now move this around freely. But of course, you do want to try to keep this relatively centered. And remember, this is being mirrored across So it's going to mirror what we're doing on one side. So try to keep it nicely somewhere in the center, but depending on where you're looking, up or down, you can change the expression just a little bit. I like to bring my pupils slightly inwards a little bit. Maybe we'll scale this up a little bit more like that. Okay, that looks really nice. Nice cartoony eyes. And now let's quickly just box model some teeth. So shift right click to move our 3D cursor, and then shift A to add in a cube. And then control 3 to add a subdivision modifier with a level of 3. And let's just scale this down. And tab into edit mode to go ahead and extrude out a nice point, and make sure we have faces selected here. So I can select this bottom face and just press E to extrude, S to scale, and then let me jump back into front view so we can press G to move and X to move this left a little bit, just to give us that fang look. Something like that. Maybe I'll scale it down a little bit more. Okay, and in object mode, let's scale this down and just place this somewhere we like. And of course, adding a mirror modifier to go ahead and mirror this across the head. And let's reset the position of the 3D cursor so it's out of the way. So Shift S, cursor to world origin, and then just adjust the size and position of the fangs to your liking. I think something like that will do. And to be fair, we probably could sculpt a little bit more of a dent in the lip, like where the fang is sticking out. But, you know, I don't think it's really going to be worth our time right now. So I'm not going to worry too much about that. But I think as a nice quick pair of fangs, I think this is looking pretty nice. Okay, so now let's actually make a start on the clothing, which is what this section is supposed to be all about. But don't forget to hit a quick Control S to save that up. Now let's take a look at how we can model some clothing. All right, so to start us off then, how about we make a start on the collar? So this should be nice and easy. I think we're not really going to do much sculpting on this at all. It's going to be more traditional box modeling than anything else. So let's start by adding in a cylinder. So Shift A, and under meshes, let's add a nice good old cylinder. But before you go ahead and click on anything else, make sure you toggle open this add cylinder menu down here. And I like to set my vertice count to 12. And that way then it's pretty low poly and easy to work with compared to the standard. I think 32 inches might be the default. So go ahead and click off that once you've done that. And you can see it in the side here. So mine is cylinder.001. Go ahead and select that. Let's just move this into place. So G to move, Z to go ahead and lock this to the Z axis. Okay, I think something like that will do. Now S to scale, something like that. And let's take a look in right side view actually. So tilde key, right side view, just so we can get a better look at how this is sitting. Something like that. Now we need to scale this down. So let's press S to scale, Z to lock it to the Z axis. But in this case, hit Z again to lock it to the local Z axis of that object. It's a nice little tip for you. And maybe something like that. I think we'll do initially. And then let's use tilde key to jump into front view and take a little look. Okay, quick Control A to apply that scale. And now what I want to do is to delete some of these faces to create a nice hole in the top and bottom. So let's go ahead and jump into edit mode and also hit / just to isolate this briefly. And in order to delete some of these faces, then make sure that we are selecting faces up here. And I think let's double check which way the front is. So front, and I want to hold shift and select the top here. The front two faces here, and with shift still held, select the bottom one. And now if I hit X and delete faces, this is going to give us the nice basis to our collar, which we can, shape and model as we normally would to create a nice collar. So / to bring everything back. And let's initially start getting the initial shape. So for this, I'm going to select edges, and holding Alt will let us select this entire loop. So hold Alt and select this edge here, like that. And then let's go ahead and just hit S to scale. start getting that collar shape. And perhaps you want to bring this down a little bit as well. So G to move, Z to lock this to the Z axis. And then inside here, we can turn on X-ray actually if yours is a little obscured. But holding Alt again, let's just grab this bottom loop and bring it up and scale it out a little bit. I think mine's a little too low right now, so let me just turn off X-ray and adjust the shape on this, just so it's a little bit easier for us to see what's going on. Maybe something like that. And if you're getting this now where we've got the collar going inside the shoulder, what I like to do is to jump into sculpt mode, turn on X-axis mirroring, and using the good old grab brush, let's just adjust the angle of this just a little bit. And this is what the grab brush is really good for, even if you're only working on low poly objects. It's great for just doing those nice and evenly distributed movements. Now, a lot of people tend to use like the proportional editing tool in edit mode, which essentially is doing the same thing, but in a way I find this a little bit of an easier tool to utilize for these sort of tasks. So even if you're not doing high resolution or high detail sculpting, the sculpting tools can still be incredibly useful. Okay, how does that look though? Not too bad at all. I think now we can go back into edit mode and just start extruding out the rest of this collar. So let's build this internal bit. So I'm going to hold Alt and select this top edge again. And initially let's extrude it inwards. So E to extrude, S to scale it in ever so slightly, and then E to extrude again. But now let's lock this to the Z axis to bring this down. And then S to scale this inwards a little bit, something like that I think we'll do. And now let's select vertices and just pull this in ever so slightly. Don't worry too much about this clip-in right now. We're about to add a modifier to our collar to give it a little bit of thickness anyway. And perhaps I'll bring these over slightly and pull them down just to give me a nice collar shape. Okay, looking very nice. Now let's go back into object mode and have a quick inspection. Not too bad at all. I like it. Now let's go ahead and in our modifiers, let's look for a solidify modifier. And if I turn up my thickness while holding shift to do this nice and slowly, we can add just a little bit of thickness. It should do fine. And you can play around with the offset too, just to make it look and sit in the right place, maybe something like that. And then we can close this up and inside the modifiers search for the subdivision to stack this on top or underneath rather. So it's going to solidify and then subdivide the shape, and then we can scale and just play around with our positions again. Okay, and that's looking pretty good. And I think the main thing I want to do here now is just to solidify up this edge a little bit more. So back in back in edit mode, let's go ahead and select edges. And I want to add a quick edge loop all the way around here just to firm up the shape. So we can hit Control R for that. And now we can hover our cursor on our shape here. And if you hover it around this middle section on this edge, it's going to give you the example of what edge is going to create. Or we can just select this and then slide it down while it's still active and then select again. And that's going to give us a nice little refined shape to our collar. And it's probably worth doing it on the inside as well. So Control R, add a loop cut and just bring this down slightly, just to firm up the shape of this collar. That's looking pretty good. And now we can probably either just, well, it's up to you really. You could apply these or keep the modifiers active. You know, it's completely up to you. But if we right click, we can shade smooth that. And just like that, we've got a nice simple collar on this character. And now it's probably worth moving on to, do we want the bow tie next? Because we want a nice little bow tie going on here. Or do we want to do the cloak first? Let me think. It's probably worth, we'll leave the bow tie till last because it's one of those nice little finishing touches. So let's play around with the sculpt tools. And now I want to show you how we can use some of the mask extract tools to take some of our existing mesh and start repurposing it for different parts of clothing. Because when it comes to sculpting, the best thing to do is just to keep repurposing different parts rather than starting from scratch every single time. So what we're going to do then is to jump into sculpt mode on our chest here. So Control Tab into sculpt mode. And in front of you, let's go ahead and look at a new tool now called the mask tool here, or the lasso mask, or I think it might be box mask for you. So click on the box mask, and if you hold down click, you'll get a couple of variants. And in this case, I want to select the lasso mask. And now what this is going to do is if I just click and drag, I can create and select different sections to mask off. And if at any point you want to clear your mask, you can hit Alt M, and that's just going to reset everything. And so what we want to do is just to select a section of the chest here that we want to repurpose for the clothing. And in this case then, what I'm going to do is just come up and select a nice section like this. And of course, because we have X-axis mirroring on, it's going to automatically do that on the other side. Now let's come around to the back here, and I'm going to do the same thing and just try to capture the back part of the body too, something like that. Now let's / just to inspect our masks, because it's not the cleanest thing right now and I don't want to get any of this bottom bit in. So in right side view, holding Control and draw in a nice line around the bottom here will actually remove the mask. So holding Control is to remove, and then just doing the regular one will select it. And just like that, I've managed to get rid of the bottom selection, but I do want to clean up the mask edges a little bit. And for that, let's use the regular mask tool. And now this is just like the sculpting brush as we normally have it, but instead of grabbing anything, we're going to be painting a mask on. And so I'm going to turn my strength up to 1, making sure it's on plus, and using F as regularly to adjust the size of your cursor. Let's just neaten up the lines here a little bit, and around the back of the neck like this. Okay, it's looking pretty good. And let me do / just to bring this back. Okay, I think we need to reduce this, and I'm holding Control once again to remove a little bit of this mask. Okay, let's jump into front view, / to bring everything back and take a quick look. Okay, I think that will do nicely. So with your mask selection now in place, in order to extract this mesh, what we can do is go into mask and hit mask extract. Now, typically I just leave all these as default and then hit extract. And what we've got here is a new mesh, and by default, it automatically applies a solidify modifier. So we can increase the offset just to bring it out. And then holding shift, I'm just going to adjust the thickness to my liking. Something like that looks pretty good to me. Okay, and then what we're going to do is apply this and then hit that with a quick Control A to apply the scale reset. And in sculpt mode, let's go ahead and switch back to our grab brush. Hit it with a quick remesh. Now we shouldn't need too many faces for this. 22,000, okay, that doesn't look too bad. I'm just holding shift to smooth this over a little bit. And we can actually, I tell you what, another tool is quite handy at this point. If we take a look at the mesh filter, now what the mesh filter does, it lets us apply effects to the whole mesh at once. We can change what option we're doing here. So initially, let's try the smooth, and my strength is on 1, and leave all these active, X, Y, and Z. We can just click and drag to the right across the screen, and slowly but surely, you can see, don't go too far with this. Eventually, if you go too far, you sort of ruin it, but bring it back to the left, and this will start smoothing it over for us as a whole, rather than me going through and smoothing out every little bit. And then perhaps we'll want to inflate a little bit too, so a little bit back and forth on this. Very nice. G to switch back to that grab tool, and perhaps just neaten these up a little bit more. If I'm honest with you, at this point, I'd probably If I really wanted a nice smooth finish on this, I'd probably remesh it first with the quad remesher add-on, but I wanted this tutorial to not include the use of any paid add-ons or anything. So all of this is purely vanilla Blender. And right now I'm just going around and pulling the sides down a little bit just so they're all matching and also covering up the base of the body. Something like that I think looks pretty good to me. And what I'm going to do then, perhaps I'll up my resolution a little bit more just to really try to get a nice smooth edge here. But of course, you know, as I always say, the more time you spend on these, the nicer finish you can get. Maybe something like that. And where is my line project? Once again, flatten the bottom of this to get a nice finish. Back into object mode to take a step back. And all right, that's looking pretty nice. That's a nice little cloak overcoat he's got going on. And I think now let's work on this big collar. So he's going to have a nice big collar. It's going to come up like this now. And essentially we're going to be using the exact same method as we did with the collar by starting with a cylinder and then just modeling this out. So once again, feel free to pause me and give yourself a little bit of a challenge. Try modeling that yourself. But I'm going to be doing it now in 3, 2, 1. Let's get to modeling the big collar. So once again then, let's start with a cylinder being the closest shape to what we're looking for. And I think 12 vertices will be fine for this. And let's bring this down. And then right side view, just line it up reasonably to look pretty good about there, I'd say. And now once again, we need to delete some faces. So in edit mode, let's select faces, / to isolate. And I think the front 4, is it the front 4? Do we want to get rid of those? Or just the front 2? I think the 4, get rid of 4 and the top and bottom one. So I'm shift selecting all of those, X, delete faces, / to bring everything back. And now staying in edit mode, let's go ahead and select edges and turn on X-ray so we can go ahead and see our cylinder through the character. And then let's start by moving the position of the top of the collar. So I'm going to hold Alt and select this top edge and then scale this out nice and wide. And then in side view, let's press R to rotate and just bring this up nice and wide. And we can do the same with the bottom, holding Alt. Let's press R to rotate this a little bit, just to put this into place. Turning off X-ray. And let's go ahead and add an edge loop to start getting that curl. So Control R, then left click, right click, S to scale. And then just make those little adjustments as we need. And now it's probably worth jumping into sculpt mode, grabbing the grab brush, making sure X-axis mirroring is enabled. And now let's just start moving our low poly object into the shape that we are looking for. And on the bottom here, I'm simply trying to follow the shape of my cloak temporarily. Let's get that looking pretty good. And of course, just taking it easy and using shift to smooth a little bit whenever you find your mesh getting a little bit messy. Okay, something like that I think is looking pretty good. I want these to be nice and pointy. And let's take a look at this from the side. We might need to give ourselves more geometry. But working on a flat surface like this, I'm not really going to remesh because that will cause us some issues. So let's go ahead and just subdivide it with the subdivision surface modifier, just to give us more topology again. And then we can apply that and jump back into sculpt mode and start sculpting again. Now we've got even more to play with. Nice and easy. Take your time. Shift to smooth. And don't forget, if you are using a mouse, when you try to use shift and smooth over these things, because they're very low poly, you might find yourself smoothing way too much, so you may need to come in and turn your strength of your smooth brush way down. But if you're using a graphics tablet, just be nice and gentle when you are hitting your sculpt with the smoothing function. And let me bring these up like this, and then smooth these over a little. How are we looking? I'm gonna need to bring these in more here. I think I've pulled them out a little bit too far. I still want that nice arc to the collar. Nice prominent shapes. Okay, how is this looking? Let's take a quick step back. Okay, that's looking really nice. Now let's go into object mode and give this the same treatment as the collar. So add a quick solidify modifier, playing around with your thickness and the offset to your liking, and hit it with a Control A if you're having any sizing issues, and reset those scale values. Stacking this with the subdivision surface modifier. And how does it look at 2? That's going to be really nice. And if you want this to be nice and pointy on the edges, we can just go ahead and add in a nice loop cut here. So Control R again, just so we get this nice loop cut. Click and slide this towards the edge. What? Slide this towards the edge. Could not get my words out there. Like that. And that gives us a nice pointy finish. And then let's right click shade smooth this. And I think that's looking really nice. I'm happy with how this collar is looking. Once again, I find myself wanting to come in and play with this for way too long. So let's step away from that. That's looking really good. Super close to the end. A couple more pieces of clothing to go. So stick with me. We are almost there. I know this has been a crazy long tutorial, but hopefully, you know, after a couple of sit-down sessions, you manage to make it through this, and hopefully you learn a lot along the way too. So next up though, I just want to add a nice waistcoat here. So we're going to do the exact same method as we did to create the cloak, but we're going to just take a little bit of mesh to create like an internal waistcoat like this. So once again, feel free to mute me and try that yourself. But I'm going to plod along with it anyway, and we'll see how this turns out. So once again then, we're going to do the exact same thing we've done already for the cloak. I'm just going to select my torso here. And let me just re-enable my screencast keys because I took a little bit of a break there. And Control Tab to jump into sculpt mode, and Alt M to remove any existing mask. And we're going to mask any existing mask. And then let's go. You can tell I'm tired when I start messing up my words. But then let's go ahead and select that lasso mask and do the exact same thing as we did before. So I'm going to try to create a similar sort of shape here, but in a sort of, what's the word? This is a waistcoat. Yes, in a sort of waistcoat fashion. And then / briefly to isolate this. How far? We don't really need it going too far back here, but let's just hold Control just to remove this bottom piece, because I don't want to do it along the bottom. Do we need any on the back? We might be able to get away with just hiding this bit. So don't forget, hold Control and then swipe to go ahead and remove any of that. And we could use our mask brush to go ahead and refine this to our liking. I'm just going to hold Control and go along this, something like that. I think there are some tools up in here to feather and, you know, just smooth over your mask automatically. But I like to come in here and just paint it on a little, just to refine. Maybe something like that. Maybe a little bit across here. And then / to bring everything back. Let's take a quick look. And okay, I think that'll do nicely. So once again, mask extract, keeping it all default. Now let's bring up the offset and also holding shift, nice and slowly increase our thickness a little bit. And I'm trying to get the appearance that this is sitting underneath the overcloak. So you might have to come in and, and sculpt and pull this out slightly just to keep this looking like it's sitting underneath. But I think that'll do for my thickness. Apply this, Control A to quickly reset that scale value. And once again, jumping into sculpt mode with Control Tab, hit this with a quick remesh. Doesn't need to be too high poly, but I think that might be a little bit too low. Let's give ourselves 10,000 faces. Okay. And holding shift just to smooth over these edges a little. And then using the grab brush just to refine. And I might be going a little bit quicker at this point. I don't mean to rush, but I just know that most of you don't make it this far into my tutorials. So I don't want to keep you longer than is necessary, really, because I'm sure that by now some of these functions are already becoming second nature to you. I tell you what, let's explore another brush. Let's try the scrape brush. Now, I love the scrape brush. The scrape brush is really good for getting a nice flat edge, like a cool sharp finish. Sometimes I'll try and use the scrape brush to go ahead and scrape along an edge to really refine it a little bit. Perhaps I'll / just to isolate this. Try to come in and get this at a nice angle. Of course, these sort of movements are probably a little bit easier with a pen tablet than when you are using a mouse. But of course, all of this is sort of optional anyway. You don't really need to refine a lot of these edges as much as I'd like to come in and do, especially when they're not going to be seen. Okay, / to bring everything back. So ideally, I'd probably remesh this even higher to get a really smooth finish on this, but in the space of time, I think this is going to be just fine. And I think using the Draw Sharp tool then, let's just draw a little bit of a line down here, just to indicate where there is a sort of seam on this. And then perhaps we'll use the crease brush set to -, just to firm this up a little bit more. And then lastly, the inflate tool. So press I for the inflate, and then just to inflate this even more, just to really define that crease. And you might need to smooth it over a little bit. But something like that should do nicely. There's my little crease in the center here. Let's pull it back once again, take a little look. Okay, looking good. Maybe I'll just Alt-Q to tab into the cloak briefly and just pull this out ever so slightly. This is just Keelan, your boy Keelan being a little bit of a perfectionist, making some extra adjustments. Okay, cool. That's looking nice. Back into object mode. Let's take a step back once again. Quick Control S to save. What's next? So almost there. We are so close. We need to add a little bit of I like to add a little square here just to indicate the front of the shirt, and then we'll put some buttons on it and then finish with a bow tie like this. Okay, so for that, I'll probably just add a plane. So Shift S to move my cursor to the chest here, and let's do Shift A to add a plane. And then let's press G to move, Y to bring this out, then S to scale this down. And it's going to be easier to see from the side if we have a little bit of thickness. So let's hit this with the solidify modifier, Control A to reset the scale, and then just give us a little bit of thickness. I think I'm going to set my offset to 0 in this case. And let's jump into right side view and just rotate and move this into place. Okay, that'll do. And now tab into edit mode, and I want to make sure I'm selecting this bottom edge. And then in right view, we can just press E to extrude, E to extrude. And actually, maybe we'll just pull this down further here. And I sort of want to tuck it underneath. And this bit here, like that. Perhaps we'll need to pull out the blazer ever so slightly. Or perhaps we could pull this down. Oh, I'll tell you what, actually, if I just bring this out, we can just play around with the offset to adjust the way it sits. Maybe something like that. Okay, and perhaps pull this up a little bit more. Okay, and then in object mode, let's add a subdivision, Control A, and something like that, maybe a subdivision level of 2, and then we just need to define these edges a little bit, and you can either go ahead and add more loop cuts using Control R, like that, or another way you can actually refine edges while using a subdivision modifier is to press N, and under Item, your edges have a crease, which is pretty cool because if I increase the crease on this, what it does is it lets me define or tell Blender that I want these edges to stay sharp. So if I hold Alt and select all of these outside edges and start increasing the mean crease, you can see it sort of solidifies those up. But looking at it now, I'm not too sure it's really giving me the look that I want. So perhaps we'll just go for the original method of hitting it with a loop cut. So Control R, drag this up, Control R, drag this up. Do we want one in the center too? Yeah, do you know what? I think we will have one in the center like that too. That looks pretty good. So back into object mode, let's go ahead and convert this to a mesh so it applies all of our modifiers for us. So right click with this bit selected and convert to mesh. Now this is all mesh that we can start sculpting on. But hit it with the quick Control A once again, and then back in sculpt mode, let's turn on X-axis mirroring and just refine the position of this with the sculpting grab tool, like this, and then Alt-Q, toggle into the waistcoat and just refine that a little bit more as well. Okay, let's take a step back once again. Looking good. And now the last thing, well, actually I want some buttons too. So last two things, let's do the buttons. So Shift A, add in a cylinder, keeping it nice and low poly. Let's try, I'm thinking 24 perhaps, because I don't want it to look too hexagonal. And let's bring it out. So G to move, Y to lock this to the Y-axis. S to scale, and then Z to lock that scale into the Z axis, and just bring this down to start making a button. Control A to apply scale there, and let's just create an inner cavity. So in edit mode, select faces, select this top edge, and we're just going to inset. So I to inset, something like that, and then just E to extrude this downwards, and I think that should do just nicely. And on top of that, let's add a bevel modifier and perhaps give it a segment of 2 and bringing it down while holding Shift to adjust, just to give us a little bit more of a rounded look. Then right click Shade Smooth. Okay, that's going to be really nice. And now in our left view or right view, I'm just going to scale this down and move and rotate this into place. Let's jump into front view and take a look. Okay, that's looking pretty good. I think I'll duplicate it. Shift D, just to bring another one down. Okay, tilde key front view. How does that look? Maybe I'll adjust the spacing slightly, making sure I keep this nice and flat to my character. Okay, looking really nice. And one more piece of clothing then that we're going to add is a simple bow tie. And for that, let's do Shift A again. Start with a nice cube, scaling it down and bringing it out. So G to move, Y to lock this to the Y-axis. Control 2 just to give this a quick subdivision modifier. And let's add a loop cut down the middle just to give this a little bit more of a square look. So tab into edit mode, Control R for the loop cut tool, left click and right click to leave it perfectly centered, like that. And now let's add another cube. So let's do Shift S to move the cursor to this object, then Shift A, add another cube, Control 2 for that subdivision modifier. And let's bring this off to the right. Scaling it up. In front view here. Something like that. And now in edit mode, we just want to give this a little bit more of a triangular shape. So I'm just going to select faces, select this edge here, and then S to scale, Z to lock this to the Z axis. And we might actually want to shrink it inwards like this as well. So S to scale, Y to lock it to the Y axis. Okay, back in object mode. Let's just move this into place. Something like that. And is it a little fat? Let's select both of these. Shrink them down a bit on the Y-axis. And now we just want to mirror this across. Like that. Okay, that's a really big bow tie. Let me just make some adjustments. Of course, your bow tie or your regular tie can look however you like. I'm just going for a nice, simple, stylized look in this case. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. And I think I'll turn up my subdivisions to 3 on both of these to get a nice smooth finish. Let's just right click and shade smooth on all of these. And then parent the bow to the center bit. So select this one, shift select here, control P to parent, keep transform. Now we can move this around. And in this case, let's scale this down in left view, G to move, R to rotate, and take a little look at our handiwork. Woo! Sort of flew through down a little bit there, but I think we were so close to the end of the clothing section, it was hard not to just plow through and get it done for you. Right, let's reset this cursor. Shift S, cursor to world origin, briefly turn off our overlays, and give it a quick rotate. Check out your handiwork. This is looking awesome. And hit it with a quick Control S to save too, because I think that should be our clothing looking really good. Let's go ahead and just shade smooth everything so we don't see any of these individual faces. So select everything, right click, shade smooth. Okay. And now this is looking great and ready for us to start adding some textures. So once again, take a nice break. And when you're ready, come back and let's go ahead and jump in to texturing. Alrighty then, so you've made it all the way through the sculpt, and now we're at the point where we want to start adding some textures to really bring this guy to life. And I must say, you know what, this is looking even better than my original sculpt of this character. I suppose sometimes it just works out for the best. So what we're going to be doing now is to explore 2 ways of texturing your characters, because we've got the sort of regular default textures that we can utilize, but the only thing that's a little bit more abnormal that I want to explore is using some of the built-in painting function within Blender's sculpting tools to add a little bit of nice detail to our character's face. In this case, I'm thinking I just want to add a little bit of a dark purpley circular shade to the eye sockets and the eye bags here, and perhaps add the same purple then to the lips and some darkening and shading to the nostrils and the ears. Other than that, everything else will just be using Blender's default shaders to go ahead and, color the hair, the clothing, and all that other stuff. So first things first then, let's go ahead and take a look at how we can paint our character's face. And the first thing I want to do then is to combine the neck, the ears, and the head into one object. Now we're not going to remesh these because in fact, I'm going to be detaching the neck again afterwards, but I like to combine them just for that initial painting step. So to start, let's click on the ears, and I think, yes, we still have this mirror modifier active. So at this point, I want to apply this so I can safely join this onto the head without then trying to mirror the head. So in the drop down, let's click apply. And now if I quickly toggle into edit mode, this is now a complete mesh. And then do we have anything active on the neck? We don't. Anything active on the head? We don't. So I'm going to shift select on the neck, the ears, the head last, and just hit Control J. So now these have gone ahead and have been joined up into one object. And now we can just hit Control Tab to go ahead and jump on into sculpt mode. And in fact, let's go ahead and just turn off the vertex count. I don't like having little numbers in my periphery if I no longer need them. So turn off statistics. Okay, cool. So in order to access the painting function in Blender Sculpt Mode then, just scroll up, middle mouse click to find it, and here we have the paintbrush. And now before we go ahead and start painting any colors, I want to change the matte cap I'm using. And if you're not familiar with what matte caps are, in fact, I've been using one this whole time. You're probably just on the default one, which is fine. But in the top right here, if I open up this drop down, you will probably hear Studio, and then on this default one here, or perhaps this one, it doesn't really matter too much. This is sort of just a preference thing, but I like to use a matte cap, and I use the default one here. And you might notice as well that I tend to enable cavity with a world space ridge set to 0.5, valley set to 1.2, and the type set to world. These essentially just affect how much of that shading you get in those crevices and those ridges. Not really relevant to the topic right now. But the point I'm making here is that when we are now looking to start painting some color, ideally we want to select a matte cap, which brings us as much true white light color as possible, so our colors are very true to what we are actually painting. And the one the guys over at Blender tend to use, I saw this at one of their presentations as a recommendation, and it was a great point, is if you go on the drop down and the studio, this bright white one here is essentially giving you a really true white color contrast here. So when we start painting our colors on, we'll get a really true idea of what they look like, and it's a nice basis for us then to start painting onto our character. Of course, we're not going to use this when we render later. We're going to be adding our own lighting setup and such, but essentially if I'm texture painting, I switch to this studio matte cap here. So okay then, so now let's take a look at how we can actually start painting on this head here. So with that paint tool selected now, you can see that up the top we've got our nice color palette. And the way this works is you can have two selected at any one time, and if you hit X you can toggle back and forth, and it's good to have these because there's not really an eraser in sense when it comes to texture painting. So what you'll want to do is initially set your base color, and for this one then let's just select the black, and I'm going to create perhaps a slight off-white. I think I'm going to teeter it slightly into the blue, like very, very slightly, or maybe slightly into the purples. Either way, my vampire is going to be very pale. And then with the paint tool selected, and I'm going to turn my strength right up to 1, and I'm going to make sure X-axis mirror is enabled, and we can just start painting. And you could see there was a little bit of a flicker there, and that was Blender automatically creating a color attribute behind the scene for us to store all of this color data. And I'm just going all around, and I / to isolate just these objects temporarily, like that. Okay, that's looking pretty good. / to bring everything back. And you can see in here we've got this color attribute now called color, and you can also see this down here inside the data properties for our object under color attributes. And this is where all the data then for our color stuff is going to be stored. But what we're going to do then is with the base color set now, we're going to keep the base color active. And if I hit X, what I want to do, in my case anyway, you feel free to add some face paint and just make yours look quite unique. But what I'm going to do is also select a nice darker purpley color perhaps to start teetering into these colors where we get these nice purples, and turning my strength down to like 0.5, drop in the size of my brush. I'm going to start nice and lightly just darkening these eye sockets to give my vampire a nice undead sort of appearance. He hasn't slept in a long time because he is hundreds of years old, if not thousands of years old. And the reason then we keep the base color as our active other color is because if at any time we want to sort of erase, we need to hit X, and then we can start drawing that base color back on, because there isn't actually any dedicated like eraser tool in painting. You just need to paint over it or just re-add in that base color. I think I might drop this a little bit darker on my value here. But this part, once again, is preference in terms of the colors you want to pick. In terms of the general appearance you want to go for. And if you find in your edges are a little bit hard, while you're using the paint tool, you can hold shift, and just like when you're smoothing with the sculpt tools, this will smooth and blend and blur those transitions a little more. Okay, I think that's looking pretty cool. I think I'll do the same for the lips. So I'm just going to add a little bit of purple down here. And of course, because I'm only using a strength of 0.5, you may need to go over this a couple of times. Perhaps I'll add just a smidge to the upper lip there. And if you were finding yours is coming out very like, perhaps if yours is a little bit pixelated, the reason might be that the resolution of your sculpt is quite low, and the way color attributes work is that they are essentially just adding some color to the vertices, and the higher resolution your sculpt is, the nicer the painting is going to look. But in this case, I just wanted to keep this nice and low poly, easy and accessible for a beginner sculpt, and hopefully then not too taxing on your computers. Okay, cool, that's looking good. Now I'm going to rotate and do the same thing for the inner ear, nice and light initially. Unfortunately, because I'm using a pen tablet, you can see we've got the pen pressure sensitivity enabled, so the lighter I press, the lighter the color is going to be. But of course, you can always just reduce the strength a lot if you're using a mouse and you're trying to get that softer look, and then holding shift just to blend a little bit to add a nice bit of shading in those ears. Okay, that's looking good. Not too bad, maybe a little bit in the nostrils. And I'm sure some of you, I know a lot of my students are actually painters too, so by the time they learn how to 3D sculpt as well, and the textures they are painting look outstanding. I really wish I came from a painting background actually, but I actually came from a software engineering background. I was always a bit of a techie rather than an artist, but eventually I took the leap and I wanted to pursue art a little bit more. Okay, this is looking good. Right, so what do we think? We jump back into object mode. This is looking pretty good. I think that will do. Now we're going to move on and look at how we can add some basic materials to the rest of the sculpt. But in order to be able to see any active materials now, we need to jump in to material preview. But what you'll notice is if I hit material preview, I lose the paint I've just done. But don't worry, it's not been deleted or anything. It just means we need to actually set up the material now and plug in the data that we painted on so we can see it in material preview along with the rest of the materials that we're going to go ahead and set up. So I think to start, if we just set up the face material first, because that's going to be the most complex one and the rest is going to be nice and easy. So what I'm going to do is just select the head, and inside our material preview, let's create a new material and just call this base or skin. Yeah, skin probably makes more sense. And now what we're going to need to do, couldn't get that out. And what we're going to need to do is go ahead and set up the color attribute to feed into this base color, because by default, this is just a nice flat material. So let's open up a new workspace here. So bring your cursor up to the top right till it becomes this nice target icon, and then click and drag this out to the left. Now we've got two workspaces, and what I want to do is change this workspace to my shader editor. And by default, your big node window might be open, so hit N to close that. And then similar controls as when you're in the viewport. I'm going to hold Control and middle mouse click just to zoom in on this. And let's add a new node by doing Shift A, and we're going to search for a color attribute, color spelled the American way, and then add this in. And you'll notice there's a little option here to select one, and we can click in here and click the color. And we just need to plug this straight in then to our base color. And just like that, we've got our lovely paint job coming through into this material. And then we can go ahead and just adjust the roughness to our liking. Maybe I'll just give it 0.6, and we can close this up now because we no longer need to be plugging anything into these materials. So bring your cursor back up to the top right inside the left workspace and click and drag this out to the right, and to let go, it will go ahead then and take over, and we are back in our regular setup where we can now go ahead and start going through each object and start adding in some materials. So let's start with the hair. So I'm just going to select the hair, create a new material, and just call this hair. In my case, I'm just going to make this an off-white and bring it right down on the value to get a nice deep black color. As far as the roughness goes, I like a little bit of shine on my sculpts, I think, so maybe like 0.55. And of course, you know, if you haven't played around with the materials much, there's lots of options in here. But when we're just starting off, we don't really need to play around with too much. So for the most part, I'm just going to be adjusting the base color and the roughness and just leaving everything else as it is. Now, a quick tip for you, if you want to automatically add this material to the other parts of your hair, what we can do is select the brows, shift select on the sideburns, and select the object with the material last. We can hit Control L and link the materials, and that's going to go ahead and just duplicate that across for us. Cool. So all I'm going to do then is go through and just add a material to the rest of my objects, ready for when we want to light and render this in the next section. So feel free to mute me, put some music on, and carry on. But now I'm just going to go through and add some colors. So cloak, my cloak is going to be black as well. Like a nice deep black, and I think I want this like a leathery look, so maybe like 0.48 to have a little bit of a shine to it. The waistcoat, call this waistcoat. Make this a little bit of a burgundy, a dark burgundy sort of color. Maybe something like that, a little bit rougher. Okay, that should do nice. This one maybe 0.7 on the roughness. I think what I'm going to do with the collar, the big collar, I want the outside to be the same black as the cloak, but I want the inside to be the same color as the waistcoat. So for this one, I think we have some modified selective, right? Yes. So let's go ahead and apply the solidify and apply the subdivision. And if we tab into edit mode, you'll notice that we've got all these nice this nice topology on our piece. So what we can do actually is just use one of these edges to create a separation between the front and the back. So make sure you have edge select mode enabled there. And on this edge that runs all the way along the edge, I'm just going to hold Alt, select the middle one. And this is going all the way around to the other side. And we're going to mark this as seam. So right click, mark as seam, and this is telling Blender then that I want these two sides to be distinct from each other. And what we can do is in the material tab, let's go inside the drop down and select our cloak. But what we can then do is add another material to this object, make it the waistcoat, and with face select mode enabled, if we just hover our cursor over this inner side and hit L, that's going to select all linked objects up to the seams. So it's going to stop when it hits that seam. So L again here. And with this waistcoat material selected, if we hit assign, now going back into object mode, you can see it's applied to the inside, but kept the cloak on the outside. Okay, that's looking really cool. Now we've only got two more things. So we could add a white material for the shirt, but I might just leave it blank. I suppose it's completely up to you, but let's add a nice black material to the tie. Maybe I'll make this one look a little bit less shiny and a little bit more matte, like a 0.6. And then using that Control L shortcut to link the materials to the other one. And then add another material for the button. Just a nice simple black shiny button. And the button roughness is going to be quite low, maybe like 0.25. So it's nice and reflective. 0.3 maybe actually. and then just Control L to link it to this one. And I think you've got, oh wait, we've got the eyes too. So pupils are going to be nice and black. And I want these very shiny and reflective, maybe like 0.2 to have a nice glassy, well, almost glassy look to them. And then the eyelid object, I'm going to make this a purple that kind of matches what we've got going on with the paint that we did on the eyes. So maybe something like that, and probably worth adding a nice reflective material for the teeth too. So nice and white, bringing this down to like 0.25, so they're nice and shiny. Quick Control S to save that up. Turn off the overlays briefly, hit T to close up the tools briefly, and just like that, we have a pretty awesome looking vampire. At this point in time, what is left to do? I think we're at a good point now where we can just add some lights, tinker with some settings, set up a camera, and then just render this out. But if you made it this far, I realize this is a really long tutorial, so congratulations on making it this far with me today. Whether you've done it in one session or multiple, you should be really proud of yourself on your 3D art journey. But go ahead, take a break, and I'll see you in just a minute to go ahead and add some lighting before we do some rendering. Okay, welcome back to the final section in this tutorial. So now what we need to do is to go ahead and set up a camera, add some lights, and then I'll show you some of my preferred settings for the render before we go ahead and render out our final image. So I think first things first though, let's go ahead and add some lights, and then we'll set up a nice little camera to frame things up for us. So to start, in order to see now the world lighting that's actually going to be in our render, we need to go ahead and click this icon here to jump in to rendered view. And you'll notice by default then the world is quite dark, but we're going to be adding in some lights and changing the background color to suit us a bit better. And in this case, what we're going to do, let's start by jumping into the world settings here. And for the general world lighting, I think I'm going to pick a color that leans a little bit more into the gloomy blues and purples, and also bring it right down like this, so the value is pretty dark. And I'd like a nice dark background so that I can add in some lights and brighten this up, and also have some nice shadows. So with that added in then, what I'm going to do is add in my main light. And for me, you know, there's lots of different ways you can create different lighting setups, but I like to start with a nice top light. So let's do Shift A and add in a light. And in this case, I'm going to start with an area light. And let's push G to move, Z to bring this up. And you'll notice my light is quite small, and that's because right at the start, we made our sculpt really big. So depending on how big your sculpt is, you are going to need to increase the size and strength of your lights to suit your scene. And now everybody's might be a little bit different, but in this case, what I'm going to do is go into my light settings here, and we can adjust the size to make it nice and big. And another way that you can do this is just by right-clicking with the light selected and clicking Adjust Area Light Size. And now if I move my cursor left and right, I can adjust this to my liking. And I'm also going to set the shape to disk in this case. And now we need it to be much, much stronger, because right now for this amount of power, we're not getting much light here. So if you just right click again and click Adjust Light Power, I can keep adjusting my cursor left and right to adjust the power. And I think in this case, I might need something pretty strong like 2000. Okay, so this is looking pretty cool. I like a nice top light to get me started. And by default, we are rendering in the Eevee render engine. Now Eevee Next, which is the current render engine that has been launched with Blender, is really good. But for me, I prefer to work in cycles, which takes a little bit longer to render, but you do get a much more natural lighting appearance. So if you are working on perhaps a lower end machine, you might want to work in Eevee for now. But I'm going to toggle over to cycles and make sure that I am rendering with my GPU device here. So this is nice and fast. And now you'll see the lighting is just much prettier as a whole. But now let me just adjust the scale of my light. And what you'll find with these large lights is the bigger you make them, the softer the shadows will become. But I like my top light to give me some nice top shadows around my eyes and get a nice cool gloomy look. But now let's go ahead and add a nice key light over here, which is going to brighten one side. So to do this, let's do Shift A and add in a point light. So now this is just going to send light in all directions, and we can do the exact same thing again. You right click and adjust the radius, which sort of controls how hard and soft those shadows are. And let's adjust the strength to something like 1000 initially to make it nice and bright, and adjust in the position to your liking. I like this to be off to the right side slightly, just so it's still capturing those shadows on the one side. Maybe something like that. And now what I want to do is add some lights behind the character to start capturing these edges a little more. So I think what I'm going to do is jump into top view and just duplicate this light to the back here. So Shift D to duplicate, one on the left, Shift D to duplicate, and one on the right. So now you can see we're starting to capture these edges a little bit, and we can play around with the position and right click to adjust the radius till we get something we like. And let me just make sure I'm selecting the back one here. Okay, this looks really nice. And I like the sort of fall off on the shoulder here. Adjusting the radius to my liking. And what's also nice to do at this stage is also to play around with the colors too. So perhaps I'll make the color of this light a nice purple to really complement the skin tone and the colors we've used. And you can, add any color you want over here as well. Maybe more purple, or like maybe a cool red, pinky red. Something like that. And already we've got a pretty nice lighting setup, but perhaps I'll tinker with this one, teeter this one back a little bit. Don't want to lose too much of those shadows, and I don't want it to be too dark. But once again, another point in the tutorial, which is going to be preference. So take your time, play around with your lights, and the best way to learn is just to play around with them. If you are deciding to render this in Eevee, Eevee Next got some really cool features. So you can turn on ray tracing, which is going to give you some nicer lighting again. And even now, this looks pretty good for Eevee. So, by all means, you could render in Eevee. But I think, what else do I want to do? Let me just turn on color management. So this is all underneath the render settings here, or the render properties. And under color management, I like to set my look to something like a medium high contrast, which sort of makes those colors look a little bit more rich. And I think in terms of curves, I like to enable curves. I like to put a point in the middle to keep my midtones, darken the shadows ever so slightly. Be careful with this because you can go way too dark really easily. So just very slight on the darkening of the shadows, and brighten the highlights just a smidge too. Like that, looks pretty good. And if I set mine to, I don't know what your transform is by default either, but mine is typically filmic. That is my favorite. And let me set my rendering back to cycles for a moment and take a little look. Okay, this is looking really nice. I like it. I think that's pretty good for my lighting setup. I could probably tinker with this for even longer, but I think for the sake of this tutorial, this should do nicely. Now let's go ahead and add in a camera. So for this, I'm just going to jump back into solid view and change my matte cap back to my preferred like this. And let's change the color back to material 2, just so we can frame up this camera nice and easily. So to go ahead and add a camera, let's do Shift A and add in a camera. And my preferred way to frame things up nice and easily is to use that tilde key, jump into front view, go into view, and we want to align the active camera to view, and that's going to automatically jump it. And while we have the camera selected, then let's go inside the camera properties and play with some of these settings. Once again, going to be preference, but I like a focal length of 90 millimeters. And to make sure this is perfectly centered, let's go into the properties and change our X location to 0, so that that's perfectly centered. Now we can pull the camera back by adjusting the y-axis like this, just bringing it right down. Okay, and I want to adjust the aspect ratio here, and this can be done inside my output properties, and this again is going to be up to you. But say if you want to upload this to Instagram Reels, we could do 1080 by 9020, and then once again coming back into our camera properties, adjust the position to our liking, something like that maybe. Let's have a quick look in our rendered preview. Okay, that's looking pretty good to me. Do I want to make any other adjustments to this? I suppose, it's up to you if you wanted to adjust your Z location as well on the rotation, but I think this will do for the purposes of this tutorial. I think one last thing that might be nice to do, because right now it looks a little boring, I think, with just the face looking straight on. Or, well, it works fine, but what I like to sometimes do, so if I jump back into my object view, let me just check. So there's a couple of things still unparented to the head. I think let's go ahead and shift select all of these little things and shift select on the head. Control P. Set parent to keep transform. Is there anything else that's not parented? I think I need to parent the sideburns too. Parent that to the head. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then the last thing I want to do here is remove the neck as part of this, so I can rotate the head a little bit just to make it look a little bit more interesting. So let's tab into edit mode and then hover our cursor over just the neck and make sure anything else is deselected, and we can hit L just to select the neck itself, and we can separate this then by hitting P and separate this based on the current selection. Perfect. Back into object mode, and now what we can do is just rotate the head a little bit, and I just want to go ahead and rotate it so he's looking off to the left slightly. And I think I forgot to say there that you can jump into camera view by hitting the tilde key and go into view camera, just like that. And now while I'm in my camera view, let me just adjust the position of the head a little bit, making sure that this looks like it's sitting on the head quite well. Doesn't need to be perfect, of course, because you're not going to see the backside anyway. Check this in rendered view again. And there we go. I think this looks a little bit more interesting as a final pose. And now we can go ahead and render this. So let's go into the render settings. And depending on what it is you're looking to render with, let's do Eevee first. So Eevee is looking really good here, and I think all the default settings should be fine. If I'm honest with you, you can enable shadows, ray tracing, and when you're ready, hit F12 or go into render and click render image. But if you're rendering in cycles, make sure you're rendering with your GPU, and you might want to enable denoising if it's not enabled under render by default. Max samples 4000 is probably a lot for this. So maybe 800 should do. As far as denoising, this might be on open denoise by default here, which is completely fine. So I'll just leave that as it is, all on the defaults. But we can just go ahead and hit F12 and see how this turns out. So in solid view, just so we're not rendering anything in the background, let's render this out and take a look. And there we have our finished character render. But that's all from me today, my friends. I hope you have a beautiful day, and I'll see you in the next one.